This video is one in a series that provides detailed information on the Motorola StarMax family of computer systems. We recommend that you have pen and paper handy to take notes. Always remember to follow proper ESD procedures whenever you are assembling or disassembling hardware. Motorola's StarMax 3000 and 4000 desktop PCs offer Mac OS compatibility with 32-bit operating system support, multimedia capabilities, a high-speed memory bus, and a wide range of power and expansion possibilities. StarMax is based on a number of proven and popular technologies, including a PowerPC 603E or 604E microprocessor, Apple firmware, a PCI bus, and a mesh or Macintosh enhanced SCSI hardware interface. Standard features on a StarMax desktop PC include 3 expansion slots for PCI cards, a soft eject floppy diskette drive, a 1.2 gigabyte EIDE disk drive, an 8-speed Atapi CD-ROM drive, L2 cache with a maximum of 512 kilobytes, 3 DIMM slots supporting a maximum of 160 megabytes of RAM, integrated audio and video, internal storage expandable to 2 gigabytes, and Grand Illusion PCI support. Two drives are visible from the front of the unit. The bottom of the left drive bay holds a floppy disk drive, and the top of the right drive bay holds a CD-ROM drive. At the top of the left drive bay is a knockout panel. Behind the panel is an internal hard drive. A 5¼ drive may be added below the CD-ROM drive. To the left of the floppy drive is the reset switch. Below the reset switch is the power on LED. And below that is the power on switch. A cooling fan is behind the front bezel. On the back of the unit are ports and expansion slots. At the left is an AC inlet with a power supply voltage switch just above it. The voltage switch can be set to either 115 volts or 230 volts AC. Be certain this switch is set correctly before plugging in the unit. The power supply unit also includes a fan assembly. To the right of the AC inlet are ports for the PS2 mouse and PS2 keyboard, and for the ADB keyboard or mouse. The PS2 connections are provided for an IBM PS2 type mouse and keyboard. The ADB connection is provided for an Apple keyboard or mouse. Next to the ADB port is the Apple printer port. Next to it, a 9-pin mini DIN connector is provided as a modem port. It allows an asynchronous serial connection. To the right of the modem port are 2 mini plug audio jacks. The microphone connector is used to record audio from a microphone, while the speaker connector is used to send audio to headphones or self-powered speakers. To the right of the speaker connector is the 15-pin SVGA video connector. If an Apple monitor is used, an adapter cable is required for the SVGA port. Above the audio jacks are 3 PCI expansion slots. The unused slots are covered by knockout panels. Located to the left of the PCI expansion slots is a SCSI interface. This 25-pin connector supports external mesh or Macintosh enhanced SCSI hardware devices. Up to 5 external SCSI devices, such as disk drives or CD-ROM drives, may be connected using this port. When setting up the unit, select a stable area where it will not experience excessive movement or jarring. The area must also be free of excessive heat, dust, smoke, or electrostatic discharge. Arrange a setup that is comfortable for users and that allows easy access for service, both front and rear. Allow at least 6 inches clearance on all sides for proper airflow for cooling. Please make customers aware of this requirement. Attach power cords, monitor cables, and other peripheral cables to their appropriate connectors on all components. If a PS2 keyboard and mouse are used, make sure that they are plugged into the correct connectors. Otherwise, the system will fail to boot. Verify that the power supply voltage switch is set for the correct voltage. Plug all power cords into wall outlets or power strips, preferably with surge protection. Check all cable connections for proper seating. Refer to the StarMax User's Guide for booting instructions. Keep the following in mind when removing field-replaceable units from the chassis. Keep internal cables away from the motherboard to prevent damage to it. Be aware of all keyed connectors in the unit, including the connectors on the SCSI cable. Also, when disconnecting a SCSI connector from a device or the motherboard, be certain to grasp the connector, not the cable. Pulling on the cable may separate it from the connector. Most of the screws holding the major field replaceable units in place are concealed. Because of this, you must remove the units in the order shown in this videotape. You will need these tools to disassemble the unit: a number 1 Phillips screwdriver and a 3/16" hex nut driver. Before disassembly, power down the system. Disconnect all external cables and place the unit on a stable desk-high surface with sufficient workspace. Follow all appropriate ESD procedures. To remove the cover, face the back of the unit and remove the 3 screws from the back of the enclosure. Slide the cover back about 1 inch, then lift it up and off the chassis. The drive carrier holding a hard drive and floppy drive is located on the left side of the unit. We will remove it first. From the back of the drives, disconnect the floppy cable, hard drive cable, and hard drive power cable. Remove the 2 screws that secure the drive carrier to the chassis. Pull the drive carrier back slightly, then lift it up and out of the unit. You can remove the hard drive or floppy drive from the carrier if necessary for replacement. 4 screws hold each drive in the carrier, 2 on each side. Now remove the CD-ROM drive from the unit. From the back of the drive, disconnect the cables for data and audio. Note that the latch must be released to remove the audio cable. Disconnect the power cable. Remove the 4 screws, 2 on each side, from the drive carrier. Slide the CD-ROM drive out the front of the unit. Disconnect the other end of the CD audio cable from the motherboard by releasing the latch and pulling up on the connector. This is a fragile connection, so use particular care during removal. Note the location of the connector on the motherboard. Next, disconnect the floppy IDE and CD-ROM cables from the motherboard. Noting the location of each connector and its label. Next, we will disconnect the power cables from the motherboard, noting the location of each. A 3-pin connector provides 3.3 volts of soft power to the motherboard. 4 6-pin power supply cables, labeled P1, P2, P10, and P11, provide motherboard power. Remove the soft power connector by squeezing its tab and pulling up. Then remove the power supply connectors by grasping each connector and pulling upward. The power supply and fan unit is in the back of the chassis. To remove it, face the back of the chassis. Then remove the 2 screws that secure the unit to the back panel. Push the power supply inward and lift it up and out of the chassis. Next, remove the PCI cards. To do this, face the side of the unit. Remove any screws securing the cards to the chassis and disconnect any cables attached to the cards. Grasp each card and pull while supporting the riser card with the other hand. The riser card, which is seated perpendicular to the motherboard and is connected to it by a 188-pin connector, provides the connection between the motherboard and any PCI expansion cards in the unit. To remove the riser card, you must first remove the chassis support bar above it. First, remove the 2 screws that secure the riser card to the bar. Then remove the 3rd screw that holds the bar to the rear chassis. Slide the bar forward slightly and then lift it up and out of the PC. Then rock the riser card gently to remove it from the motherboard. Now remove the SCSI cable from the unit. Detach the cable from the motherboard by grasping the connector and pulling upward. The other end of the SCSI cable is attached to the back panel. Remove the hex nuts on the back of the unit that secure this connector. Then remove the cable. The motherboard is installed in the base of the unit. It contains the microprocessor, main memory DIMM slots, a video DIMM slot, interfaces for SCSI, I/O, keyboard and mouse ports, an L2 cache slot, battery, GIMO slot, and riser card connection. If you need to remove the video DIMM or L2 cache card, simply pull it up and off the motherboard. There are 3 DIMM slots for memory. The first slot can hold only a single-sided DIMM, while slots 2 and 3 can accept double-sided DIMMs. To remove a DIMM, press the latches outward at each end of the slot. Then grasp the module and pull. Note that DIMMs are keyed and can only be inserted one way. Reinserting a memory module is simple. Insert the module into the appropriate slot. Press down on one side, then the other, until the latches snap into place. The battery can be removed by detaching its cable from the motherboard and then tilting the battery to detach it from the Velcro strip. To insert a new one, simply reverse the steps. To remove the motherboard, first disconnect the speaker cable, power switch cable, reset switch cable, power LED cable, and fan power cable from the motherboard. Each connector is clearly labeled, as well as the motherboard locations. Also, pin 1 is referenced on the motherboard and as an arrow on each connector. To remove the motherboard, first remove the 7 screws that hold the motherboard to the chassis. Set the screws aside, but be sure to notice their type. To minimize stress on the motherboard, you should use only this type of screw to hold it in place. Facing the rear of the unit, grasp the motherboard at the farthest end and lift it up, tilting it away from you until the connectors clear the rear chassis panel. Lift out the motherboard. The fan assembly is located behind the front bezel. It has a clip on one side and is hinged on the other side. To remove it, push the clip inward toward the assembly and pivot the assembly to the left to release it. Note that the cables that attach it to the motherboard were disconnected earlier in the video. The fan is anchored in the fan housing by clips. To remove it from the housing, spread the clips away from the fan using your thumbs and release it from the housing. The speaker assembly slides into 3 metal tabs on the front of the chassis. To remove it, slide it up and to the left and out of the unit. Note that later revisions of this unit may have screws securing the speaker. A word of caution. The speaker is very fragile and can be damaged easily, so use extra care during removal. Now face the front of the unit. The bezel has an insert on the left that can be removed when switches or the power on LED need to be replaced. To remove it, slide the insert to the left and pull it away from the unit. To remove the power on LED or switches from the insert, spread the plastic clips that hold the LED switch assembly and lift it off the insert. Remove the LED by pulling it from the light pipe assembly. Reinsert the replacement LED by pushing it into the light pipe. To remove a switch, detach it from its assembly, noting the location and position of the aesthetic cover. Reinsert the replacement switch by placing it back into the assembly. Reattach the LED and switch unit by pressing it into the clips on the insert. To reattach the insert, slip the tabs on the insert into their slots on the bezel and slide the insert to the right until it snaps into place. The bezel does not need to be removed in order to service the unit. However, if removing it becomes necessary for any reason, simply remove the 3 screws on the inside top of the bezel. Release the clips in the bottom of the bezel. The bezel will drop forward from the chassis. Detach the switch and LED assembly from the insert. Then lift off the bezel. To reattach the front bezel, replace the LED and switch assembly on the insert. Place the lower clips in the slots at the bottom of the chassis. Carefully pivot the bezel toward the front of the chassis and hold in place while securing it with the 3 screws. To demonstrate installing all field replaceable units, we will begin with the speaker assembly. Face the rear of the chassis. Carefully slide the speaker back into the 3 metal tabs on the inside front of the chassis, from left to right. Replace the fan next. Insert the fan into the hinged slot and snap the right side into place. To install the motherboard, face the rear of the chassis. Tilt the motherboard slightly as you lower it into the chassis. Press it against the EMI shield on the back of the chassis, aligning the screw holes in the board with the openings in the chassis floor. Replace the 7 motherboard screws. Reattach the connectors to the motherboard for the speaker. Power switch. Reset switch. Power LED, and fan power, noting the pin 1 locations on both the connectors and the motherboard. Reinsert any DIMM modules that may have been removed. Reconnect the keyed SCSI cable to the motherboard and to the external SCSI connection. Lower the power supply into the chassis with the fan toward the back, then slide it back until it is aligned with the rear of the chassis. Replace the 2 screws that secure the unit to the rear chassis panel. Attach the motherboard power connections to P1, P2, P10 and P11. Replace the 3-pin soft power connection, noting the pin 1 location. Next, reconnect the CD-ROM data and audio cables to the motherboard. Then reconnect the IDE and floppy drive cables to the motherboard. Guide the CD-ROM drive into the drive bay until it aligns with the front of the bezel. Secure the drive using the 4 screws, 2 on each side. Connect the CD-ROM data cable, power cable, and audio cable from the motherboard to the back of the drive. Face the side of the unit to reinstall the riser card. First, line up the guide tabs on the riser card's connectors. Gently push the card into the slot and rock to seat it. Insert the far end of the chassis support bar into the holes in the chassis front. Lower the bar onto the riser card. Replace the screw that secures the bar to the chassis back and the 2 screws that secure the riser card to the bar. Note, make sure the tabs on the underside of the bar are against the back of the riser card. Replace any PCI cards that you removed from the riser card and reconnect any necessary cables. Replace any screws that originally secured the cards to their slots in the chassis. Facing the front of the PC, slide the floppy drive carrier into the chassis from back to front. Align it with the front of the bezel. Replace the 2 screws that secure the floppy drive carrier to the chassis. On the back of the drive, connect the floppy cable and power cable first. Then connect the IDE hard disk drive cable from the motherboard. To replace the top cover, face the rear of the unit. Slide the cover down over the chassis from the front to back. Slide the cover toward the front until the edges of the cover fit under the edges of the bezel. Secure the cover in place with the 3 screws. This concludes the hardware assembly overview of the StarMax 3000 and 4000 desktop models.